Hey, thanks for joining. This is Joshua 6 Up Tabletop. Wanted to discuss what we're doing in the video today. We'll be painting the Raiders Marine unit, trying to go off this exact scheme of Jim Raynor here on the screen we have with the black and grays. Trying to adhere to that. So I had painted Jim Raynor up in that scheme. So this video is basically me experimenting with different washes to try to do a simple yet a little bit dynamic to add some different colors into the black so it just doesn't look like flat black armor. So a little bit of experimenting, trying to get as close to this scheme, like I said. And yeah, super fun. This is the unit that comes along that you can bring if you are running Raynor's Raiders as a faction in StarCraft, the tabletop miniatures game. And so without further ado, let's jump into the painting. Love to hear what you guys think about the results, or which wash variety that you preferred from the ones that I showed later on in the video. So look forward to hear to that, and let's get painting. Thanks. Alright, jumping into the painting. As you can see here, I primed this black. I used actually a brush primer because my airbrush is having some trouble. So you can see a lot of the base blue, the blue plastic pointing through, so just apologize for that. This is a work in progress kind of video. I was discovering my technique as I was going along. You saw that transfer. That was actually from a Warhammer kit, but I thought it fit the Raynor's Raiders scheme pretty well. So using Dawnstone, using that scheme, we're just going to be highlighting some areas in this light gray. This is going to be a scheme that does not have many colors. So yeah, just highlight those areas in gray and just have a a smaller tip brush and try to be as accurate as possible. If you always spill over, you can always apply that black paint, black primer over again, no problem. I also wanted to point out here that I did apply some of the gray to, I guess, some of the raised areas on his hands and on his arms as well. So, any areas that you want to highlight gray, you can highlight gray. I just tried my best to go with the scheme as I interpreted it. Alright, we got Vallejo Game Color Gunmetal. To be honest, I used this paint. I hadn't used it in a while. I would prefer like a natural steel color from AK Interactive. I've used some of Vallejo's other metallic lines, so this definitely wouldn't be my first recommendation, but this is the paint I used. I mean, it didn't turn out that bad in the end, but that's kind of just a note of the process. So I kind of use this as like the Under Armour color. So yeah, you get the metal parts over the the black exoskeleton of the armor, the bayonet, the grenade. In this case, he's holding the grenade in his right hand, and just any areas underneath that you want to highlight silver. So that's how we attack that with that gunmetal step. Alright, jumping into Catachan Flesh. I just had, there's something about painting holsters for pistols in like a leather color. So I use Catachan Flesh. There's plenty of other leather colors out there. Whatever you think or whatever you have works best for the scheme. I go for a little darker leather. You can always highlight it if you want. And that's the thought behind the leather for the holster. Alright, so I'm using Vallejo White and trying to implement the Raynor's Raiders sigil. A little challenging to paint this freehand, just in general, but under the camera, so I do my best. But, you know, you can try drawing this out prior to painting it on the model to kind of see how you would form the shapes, but I think all in all, it looks a little differently across each of the 6 Marines I painted, but I think it's a good addition to the model to identify them on the table as Raynor's Raiders. Alright, using magenta. For this trial, there was 5 other different washes I used, and I'll cover those later, and we'll see the results. But this is magenta by Winsor Newton. This is an oil paint. So this is mixed to a wash consistency with mineral spirits, and I basically apply it all over the model. I'm trying to emphasize that it gets in the recesses where possible. That's kind of the strategy of this video, is to really try to do a simple, effective way to make black more than just a, black paint. Try to add some depth, different color shadows to the black paint, and experimenting on what works and what doesn't. So I use the makeup brush, and this is probably a couple hours later, so it's fairly dry. I don't need to add any mineral spirits or anything. I just wipe it off the very top surfaces and do my best to keep some of that magenta color in the recesses, as you can see. Mostly successful. You can see it gather on the feet and by the grenade, and kind of in that inner body area where the brush didn't collect. You see it a little on the Raynor's Raider sigil, but pleased with how it turned out. Alright, so this is after I've applied a matte varnish all over the model to kind of seal in the oil. I go back and do a highlight with that gray, and just highlight the areas and kind of bring the highlights up. Alright, for my scheme, I wanted to kind of make the weapons stand out. So I do a pretty intricate, I guess, edge highlighting is the best way to describe it. But basically every raised highlight here, I go in with the Warp Fiend gray. And it's essentially a gray that has a bit of purple in it. And as the different washes I use, are reds and purples, it kind of mixes and blends well with that scheme. So there's a little bit of purple in the gray, and basically most of the raised edges I just try to find and highlight with a small brush. may not be the cleanest, but it still looks pretty good. The highlights, it's a little tough to highlight underneath the model, but I think it contrasts well against like the flat, clean look of the armor. So I'm happy with the output of that. Moving on, using Cadian Flesh Tone to highlight, I used a little bit of the Cadian Flesh as a base tone. Basically with this scheme, we will be using the clear masks basically that come with the kit. So I just want a dark color and then a highlight color that is higher in range, just to create like a light and dark contrast. And you can see it a little bit under the clear armor, but it's not a big deal. Here I use Troll Slayer Orange, and this is just to highlight, kind of have like an energy effect, sci-fi effect with the guns. I think orange, along with the mask that I'll end up gluing on to the model, I think it works nice with the purple as a color scheme. Alright, scale color artist. I have a little bit of a sponge here that I'm using. This is a very simple scheme, not a lot of colors. So just to add some realistic, battle damage, weathering effect. I know that's not everybody's preferred scheme. If that's not something you're interested in, then obviously you can skip that step. I think it does help blend some of the colors together, blend some of the basing. This is just a pretty basic schema, basing scheme I use, just some earth basing and like a little bit of grass flock. And so nothing too difficult in that area. So we'll be looking at the different washes and kind of how they contributed and how I like that. So this is the model that we had been working on, and this is the magenta oil wash. This is permanent red. This is kind of a budget oil color. It's definitely not like a top line artist oil, and it kind of did work similar to the magenta. I think it did not cover as smoothly, and it kind of coagulated in the recesses, but I still think the red does actually provide a nice effect. I think it's in line with the magenta. This is an enamel paint, aka interactive rush streaks. This gave it a more like grungy, dirty feel, which I think worked nice with like the chipping and sponge damage that we did. Definitely a more muted, and overall I was really happy with the rust effect. Alright, Carbon Crimson, moving into the acrylic washes. This does have a little bit more of that crimson tone to it. It kind of mimics the magenta, but I thought it did a really good job for those who might be averse to using enamels or oils. With the gray highlights on top, it looked really nice. Moving on to Reiklin Flesh Shade. I feel like I could tell a little bit less about this, but this also kind of had that brown tone to it, a little bit of red in it, so it kind of fit like the testing scheme what I was looking for, but I could not notice as much kind of the shadows that it produced. And then same with this Serum Sepia. You can see it a little bit kind of on the Raynor's Raider sigil. You can see it a little bit in the cracks that it did produce kind of that like sepia tint, but it definitely wasn't the strongest, so I think I'd go with other options. As you can see here, this is kind of my converted Raynor. I used one of the leftover Zerg bodies, and that rounds out the painting for Raynor's Raiders. I hope you guys enjoyed this, learned something from it. It was very interesting and fun to test different schemes for painting black armor. Super excited to play with these guys, and we'll see you in the next video.